that folks, that we can turn off the recording for folks?
Mhm.
Okay. All right, I have 6, so I'm gonna open it up and I'll give it like a minute or so. Thank you for joining us. We're just gonna take a second to let folks into the room. While we're waiting, feel free to put your where you're joining us from in the chat. We know we have folks from New York State, but a lot of other areas as well. And we'd love to know who you are, why you're here, where you're coming from, and we look forward to starting soon. All right, so I'm just going to start us off with some general Zoom and NASW announcements, and then I'm going to hand it over to Felix Simpson, who is one of our leaders and facilitator for tonight. My name is Amelia Lochner-Malave. I am a staff member of the New York State chapter of NASW. I just want to make it clear that this program is a town hall on the lived experiences of LGBTQ social workers. This is not a CE program. I will put our CE schedule in the chat, but this program does not hold CEs. We do, however, encourage you to join us to listen and to learn. I would argue that this is just as, if not more valuable than any CE that you're going to go to. So I hope that you will join us regardless that this does not hold CEs. I'm also quickly just going to go over what you might know already, but how to use Zoom. We have the closed captions turned on. If you would like to hide those captions, you can click the caret next to the closed captions CC little icon. You can choose to hide them. You can choose to view the full transcript, which will pop up on the right-hand side of your screen. You can also click and drag the closed captioning across the screen if it's in front of someone's face or if you want it to be in a different section of the screen. For this tonight, we're going to be centering and amplifying the voices of queer social workers. If you are not an LGBTQ community member, we encourage you to use the reaction buttons and to engage in the chat, as well as actively listen to what your folks, what your peers are speaking of. Other than that, feel free to ask any questions, comments in the chat. You can message me for any technical or NASW related issues, but I'm going to hand it over to our leader and facilitator for tonight, Felix Simpson.
Hi, everybody. My name's Felix. I use they, them pronouns. I am actually a mostly recently graduated MSW person. So I just got my master's in May, and I'm working as a therapist in the Capital District area or region, which is very exciting for me, for mostly queer and trans folks. That just happens to be who showed up at in my office. I'm very excited. So that's just a little bit about me as a facilitator for tonight. And I'm gonna go into our normal opening statement. So hello and welcome to our third From the Ashes We Rise Town Hall. Tonight's brave space will be for LGBTQ identifying individuals to share their experiences of oppression within the profession, specifically regarding field placement and education. In this space, we welcome all QTPOC, LGBTQ, and TGN sorry, this acronym is hard for me, TGNCNB individuals to open their mic and speak. And we encourage our cisgender and heterosexual allies to listen. If you do identify as cisgender and heterosexual, we kindly ask you to refrain from speaking this evening. And if you would like to offer support to your colleagues, you can do so in the chat function. We also encourage all LGBTQ individuals to join our special interest group meeting next week, where we will develop initiatives to create change in the profession. So we encourage everyone to identify their pronouns by hovering over your picture, clicking the 3 dots and selecting the rename button and typing their pronouns. However, we also respect that everyone is on their own individual journey. So if you would like us to just use your name, feel free to identify that by just typing name. We also encourage everyone to be on camera, but it's not required. A lot of times queer people are kind of put on a platform and people are watching us. It's kind of a performing. It's a little weird. So one of the ways that we build community is to have everyone, if comfortable, put their cameras on, so that it's more like sharing space and less like a performance, or because that can be violence in a certain way as well. So before we go into the ground rules, we open tonight's meeting with a moment of silence to honor our siblings who have been taken from us too soon as a result of violence towards our community, and specifically queer and transgender communities of color. Thank you, everyone. We break the silence with the acknowledgement that the social work profession can and must protect QTPOC, LGBTQ, and TGNC, NB communities. So I'm going to go into our ground rules now. And if anybody like needs them, I can probably put them in the chat. So just let me know. They're kind of, there's a couple of them. So first one is we recognize that we must strive to overcome historical and divisive biases such as racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia in our society. Acknowledge. We must acknowledge that we are all systematically taught in misinformation about our own groups and members of other groups. This is true for everyone. No blame. We agree not to blame ourselves or others for this misinformation that we have learned, but to accept responsibility for repeating misinformation we have learned otherwise. Respect. We agree to listen respectfully to each other without interruptions. Only one person speaks at a time. However, this doesn't mean that we should ignore problematic statements, and we can and should address those statements with care and respect with the goal of helping each other learn. We acknowledge that we may be at different stages of learning on content and discussions topics. I like to call this calling in instead of calling out. Individual experiences. We agree that no one should be required or expected to speak for their whole race, gender identity, or sexual orientation. We can't even if we wanted to. Trust. Everyone has come to the table to learn, grow, and share. We will trust that people are doing the best they can, and we all make mistakes and have bad days. When these occur, let's challenge and encourage each other to do better. We acknowledge once again that we may be at different stages of learning on the topic. Share the air. Share responsibility for including all voices in discussion. If you have a tendency to dominate discussions, take a step back and help the group invite others to speak. If you tend to stay quiet, challenge yourself to share ideas so others can learn from you. I take up a lot of space in discussions often, so I will put that out there myself. I take up a lot of space. I talk a lot. So no shame in that. it's an active practice to take a step back. But as a facilitator, I will be bouncing off people's ideas today, so I might talk a lot, but I'm hoping that we can get a good discussion with everybody's voices. So that not experts. So it says, so I'm the facilitator for today. There aren't any others. This says we are experienced facilitators. I'm certainly not an expert. So we are here to help facilitate the process. Along with everyone in the group, we are here to learn. We encourage that everyone has an opinion. Opinions, however, are not the same as informed knowledge backed up by research. Depending on the topic and context, both are valid to share, but it's important to know the difference. To engage in deep learning, we will want to learn more towards informed knowledge and gain practice reflecting and speaking thoughtfully on difficult topics. And then our last ground or agreement is ask for help. It's okay not to know. Keep in mind that we are all still learning and are bound to make mistakes when approaching a complex task and exploring new ideas. Be open to changing your mind and make space for others to do so as well. It is also important to acknowledge that LGBTQ individuals are not responsible to be your own personal Google. So those are the ground rules, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. I feel like that last ground rule is a really good segue. So how this for what's happening. So how this will work is we are inviting queer, trans folks to speak about their experiences as queer social workers or students in the field about being queer and trans. However, I want to recognize that can be that educating others and educating your peers is violence in itself. So what I want to do, so I'll share a little bit about my experience as a student, which was very recent. And then I will open the floor to any other queer and trans folks to share as well. Great.
You got it, Carol?
On my phone.
Well, I tried to get it on the other computer, but it wouldn't come out.
Well, I'm gonna watch it on my phone.
The closest I got is the 20th.
So Carol Lee, you muted it. Awesome, great. So my name is Felix. I am, a trans non-binary mixed race person of color who just got my master's. I did my BSW, I have my MSW. And I joined the social work field because I thought it would be about, social justice, and I'd really be able to do the work that I wanted to do, right? And unfortunately, as a student, our town hall is focused right now on the education experience and the field experience. In both cases, I was severely disappointed. I would say that our social work academics, like the administration and the people who are instructing, are sometimes way farther behind than the students are when it comes to identity, when it comes to social justice and things that I thought that the social work field should be rooted in, right? I saw what's it called? The principles, the ethics. I'm like, yeah, I can vibe with this. And then in reality, as a field as a whole, we don't end up doing so. And I'm talking very in a broad way right now, because if I go into specifics, I will spend a bajillion years talking, and I don't want to do that just yet. So I want to just invite anybody who wants to share an experience, and maybe I'll share some of my experiences over the course of our time together. But I want to just open the floor for people first. And I want to like uplift their voices. And I know it can be hard to be first. If that's the case, I can go first. But again, I am trying to practice stepping back, right? So I will wait a couple more minutes, and if then share if nobody wants to open our discussion, okay?
Hi, I'm actually white presenting, but I would like to share on behalf of my trans friends of color who are not in the field but have been traumatized by the field, if that's possible. But again, I don't want to take up space where I don't want to talk over anybody's experience. But if it's okay, I'll kind of like break the ice with the discomfort of the first sharing and represent some of my friends, if that's all right.
Okay.
So my name's Casey and I am a master's in social work student. I'm finishing up actually in a week. So although this isn't continuing education, I did want to join again in representation of some of my specifically Black trans friends. And just the experiences that they've been through and the amount of education right now in our culture that rests kind on their shoulders. Like you said, you came into the field to face injustice, social injustice, and all of these terrible things that are happening to the community. And that's not the focus at all. And I see what my friends are going through, and it kills me to hear that they're having these clinicians treat them and call them by their birth name, or excuse me if that's not the proper term. It's hard to keep up. Cool. And just like really traumatizing and reinforcing very toxic things about them. And it's continuing to fall back on, nobody really knows how to educate outside of that population. And I think the burden has rested on the community of color and people of color, particularly Black women, for too long, far too long. And they're shy. Hopefully there's more white women, white men in this chat who are open to hearing these conversations and not just putting this on mute and running it in the car. But it's so important to integrate things like asking people's pronouns, not preferred pronouns, because microaggression is real, right? These aren't preferred pronouns. These are pronouns that identify people and who they are, not a preference. And just take a seat back and be open to understanding that our experiences aren't necessarily the same as everybody else's. It's definitely something I want to say that I have other friends that are very open to this, and it's you're not alone, and we're trying to step up. And please, thank you so much for sharing all of your experiences. I appreciate your bravery, and it shouldn't come to this, but thank you for your time. And I'm not sure if you guys run any nonprofits, or if you have any people of color, driven nonprofits. If we could maybe drop them in the chat so that we can kind of check out who's in need and how we could support, if that's possible. But thank you. I don't want to take up more time, and thank you for being brave and sharing your experiences. And I'm trying. I'm here for you. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. So something that I picked up on from you is the burden of education. Marginalized folks, I think especially queer and trans folks, where their experiences are so, the people around them are so uneducated about their experiences, then spend their whole time educating about their own experiences instead of learning. And it's, you know, we're specifically talking about the context of education and field placements. Students are supposed to be learners, not educators of their own experience. And queer and trans people have the right to exist in a space without having to be the primary educators of their own experience. It's that there's a certain trauma and violence that comes from consistently having to do that your entire life. And I think that the social work profession has done a very unintentional, I'm hoping, but impactful thing where we are not doing the educating for the queer folks. We're making the queer folks educate. So I invite other people to speak up, and I appreciate that point was brought up as like the first thing. Love it.
There's something that I'd like to share, if that's okay. It's been silent for a little bit, so
Yeah.
I guess the pressure's on. But
Mhm.
this wasn't in my name's Brian, he, they. This actually wasn't in a social work class. It was actually one of the prereqs that I had. And I've now that that I'm thinking about it, most of the problems that I have run into have been in some of those prerequisite classes to get into my program. There hasn't been much that has been weird in the program, but there was this one class that I took. It was Health 101, I think, with this professor who's just horrid. Was just very abusive. But there was this one lecture that she gave that was about the health of like the LGBT community, some of the health disparities they face, and all of that. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. I'm like, I love that. And, you know, as someone who identifies as gay, I'm like, that was, you know, it was my freshman year. That was really exciting. Well, it turns out that that presentation was probably from the 90s is my best estimate. There were some slurs used that I won't repeat here, but some very outdated language. And she felt like that she had the right to be talking about it because she did her doctoral thesis on something to do with HIV and AIDS in gay men, even though she does not identify as queer. So it was really, I remember that I was sat there and I listened to this entire lecture and it was like almost everything that she said was wrong. And she had this horrific reputation of being very abusive to her students, especially people who would correct her in class. So I did set down all my friends that were in that class. Like I had some of my friends who lived around me in the residence halls, and I sat them down and I'm like, I am going to teach you. Everything that you said was wrong, and this is what's actually right. But that was, I think, one of the worst experiences in my entire college career was that one class. And I'll never forget it, how bad it was. I was like, this is ridiculous. But it's been in some of those, there's a couple of other prerequisite classes that I took. I don't know what my program could do specifically, or if there is anything that you can do about those prereqs and holding some of those professors accountable for their content, because that is the base knowledge that all of these social workers got in my program heading into the program. Even if they knew it was wrong, I mean, it still does influence how you think. So I don't know, that's something that I've been thinking about, is those prereqs can be pretty, like, it can start there. Even if your program's good, if your prereqs suck, I mean, that's where your base knowledge comes from, so.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And that actually sparks in my head something that I'm thinking about, and I'll try not to speak in between every person. Ideally, we would be popcorning between everyone, so I want to encourage that. But your story specifically, Brian, made me think about how one of the reasons we don't see a lot of queer and trans social workers is they're not getting through school because their prerequisites have shit like that happening. They're dropping out of social work school. I have friends who I have trans friends who've dropped out of school because they're not supported in university. Either they have a lot of things going on and the university isn't supporting them, or is that they're tired of dealing with all of the transphobia that happens over and over again. I spent a lot of time with my university trying to get them to support trans people. I think that I spent way too much time on it, and I could have been doing my schoolwork, right? I could have, but I didn't. And instead I was emailing my dean to make the professors let people rename themselves in Zoom so you could put your pronouns in the bio. Like, that shouldn't have been hard. I don't know if anybody like thinks about it, but that should have been an easy request. I got the response, well, we can't make professors do that. I'm like, okay, thanks. Great. So I have to like individually ask every single professor I have to do this, outing myself. Well, I was already out, but like all this labor for me, it stigmatizes myself as the needy trans person, which I certainly was. I mean, I'm facilitating this thing right now, so I'm an out and loud and very like, this needs to happen. These are my needs. Stop being transphobic. But not all trans people are like that, and we shouldn't have to be. I'm only that way out of necessity, because otherwise I wouldn't survive. I would not have gotten through grad school if I didn't physically fight my dean, but sometimes it felt like that, right? So I just thought, Brian, like that really made me think about like all of the barriers that folks go through and hit, and some people are not going to make it through those barriers, and it's not their fault. It's the fault of the institutions who are not doing their due diligence to properly be affirming to queer people. So again, I'll open up to everybody else to share their experiences, and not just student experiences, but you know, whatever feels relevant for you.
Hi, my name's Melissa. She, her, hers. I am a lesbian, newly married. This doesn't have to, thank you. This doesn't have to do with school, but more of like field placements. I have going in and finding, your own field placements. I noticed I subconsciously have just stayed away from religious organizations because of fear of being judged or discriminated against. And I luckily am working with a nonprofit organization as a social worker with the unhoused population here in New Orleans. And I actually am now, our organization partners with church, and they all know about me being a lesbian, and I've actually had pretty success with them, and it kind of started to change my mind a little bit about being so scared of religious organizations and working with them. And so I just kind of wanted to put a little bit of a positive spin on that, that it's just changed over the time. So thanks.
I want to thank you for sharing that. I also have had a similar experience with that. I also feel religious averse. I think that's common for a lot of queer and trans people. And it's also important to recognize that plenty queer and trans people find a lot of solace and peace and happiness in their religion. And like, that's important to recognize too. But we can't deny that it's very common for queer people to be scared of religious organizations. The agency that I work for now has the director works with clergy, and we have a couple people who are like pastors on staff, and I was terrified. I was like, oh fuck, no one is going to accept me as like a queer trans person. I'm an abolitionist social worker, like a totally different opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Like I was very confused and scared about it, but I was pleasantly surprised too. But I also live in like upstate New York, and I have like a queer dinner party with some of my coworkers every week. It's great. But I think some of us get really lucky, find a lot like community with our queer social workers. And I've been lucky to have friends who are like queer and are social workers too. I have queer coworkers who I've been finding community with too. But unfortunately, that's not the case for everyone. And I feel really lucky and privileged to be able to have that. Because I've certainly had colleagues who are the exact opposite of what I'm talking about right now, right? And have been really bigoted. So I kind of want to open it up again to folks. I did see somebody who looked a little bit hesitant but unmuted. I did notice. So I want to invite that person to speak up, because I would love to hear what you have to say. We're going to use this silence as intentional pressure. So I want to invite, because I think we've been talking a little bit about like the experiences of students and education. I wanted to ask us like, or pivot a little bit to field placement in a little bit, but I wanted to invite anybody who had some experiences in education that they wanted to share if they felt moved to speak. I love that question, Amelia. So I'm gonna just read it out loud for people who maybe can't see the chat because they're driving or something. Do any elders have wisdom or encouragement for the students in the room?
I love the question. It's an invitation for me because I'm just claiming, I guess, a status as elder. So thank you for the, and I am one of those that can't read the chat. I have vision issues and I'm joining you on my iPad. So I don't know that I have any wisdom. So I hesitated going on screen, but I did want to say, for me, it's always been about community and finding, and that's why I'm here at the town hall. I'm now in a position where I'm a field advisor and I feel older. And so I'm wanting to learn what's still going on, right? So when I got my MSW in the 80s, for me, it was essential to find other queer, lesbian, and gay folks. And those were my people and my tribe. And we had a presence. And so there's both hope and challenge to hearing some of the stories I've already heard tonight and that don't surprise me. And to know that our systems still need changing. But I guess what I have to offer is after, how many years is that? Over 30? I can't even count, 40 years, right? Systems can change. And I don't know about other professions, but I have always found a home in social work with radical social workers, with others. And it's kept me going for 40 years. So I don't know if that's encouraging, but I also want to acknowledge and thank NASW for creating these kinds of spaces, because these do still sustain me, whether I create them in my personal life or professionally. Thanks.
So Becky, because you can't read the chat, people are saying thank you for sharing and thank you for so much. So I also really appreciate your sentiment and words as well. Is anybody else who, oh, Fran, I see a hand raised. Would you want to go?
Yeah, actually. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Lovely. I'm a cis grandparent of a fabulous trans grandson who and I'm a social worker, and I'm an old social worker. Well, at 81, I still feel young. But I wanted to share with you a very interesting experience my grandson is having as a transfer sophomore at a university in Fairfax, Virginia. He was very eager to have his own room, and he was very late in applying. So he thought it might be difficult. And they wanted to know the reasons. And he said very honestly, he had a note from the doctor and all of that, but he said very honestly that he was not keen to be living with men he didn't know in the same room, that he really needed his own space and some private space. And he was granted that. And he's a very talented musician. He's in music tech program at this university. School has already started, and it's been a wonderful beginning for him. And I thought that it was sensitive of the school to give him the accommodation that he needed and required. And I was hoping that that kind of accommodation and that kind of understanding and that kind of empathic approach would be accorded not just to my grandson, but to everyone in this day and age. And that's all I wanted to share. But one of the reasons I wanted very much to be a part of this as an old social worker and quite retired at this point, I did want to hear other people's experiences. I do that so that I can keep up with him at every possible step.
Thank you so much for sharing. I would also hope that other trans students are afforded that same accommodation, which is reasonable. I would hope so. And obviously my experience is only my experience, and we do have good experiences out there. So I appreciate you sharing them. I know someone else had their hand up before. Kim Dotton, if you want to, I don't know if you wanted to speak or had anything to say. I just noticed you had your hand raised before.
Hi, everyone. I'm one of the geriatrics in the group. And hope and whatnot, or inspiration. So I've never been in. I've been out since 1975, which is a long time ago. And I graduated in 1999 from the MSW program in one in Los Angeles. And I would, a lot of the schools of social work, the professors, they focus on what's in the textbook, which stems from research, hopefully. And there is not a lot of research that's being done around LGBTQ. UCLA has the Williams Institute, but I don't know if most MSW professors are aware of the Williams Institute. So there's, I would encourage people, don't give up, keep going, get your PhD, do research and more research. Because I don't think a lot of heterosexual people even know the questions to ask. They don't know the questions, they can't find the questions, they can't write the questions. So, and for those of you who do research, who are part of the LGBTQ plus communities, if you do get have the opportunities to do research or writing, think in terms of, well, and Felix, you commented on this, that our experience is our experience and we can't speak for everyone. So if research is done, think in terms of, you know, including everyone. There's so many gaps in the research, A lot of research, there's a lot of research around cisgender gay men. And right, so there is a lot of research around cisgender gay men. There's a lot of research around HIV, but not a lot else, There's a significant gap in relationship to people identified as transgender people, and also lesbians, and then bisexual people. So, you know, you have a lot of opportunities for all kinds of dissertation topics and research. Go do it. Thank you.
I have an experience that I can speak to. My name is Meredith. My pronouns are she, her. And I identify as asexual, which I think even within the queer community can feel really isolating and not represented. And I can't speak to any experiences that I had in education or in my field placement. But with my own experience, with my therapist, who's a social worker, she really had me kind of convinced for years that, like, in my dating life and my sexual life, like, I was kind of holding myself back, and it was like my fault, kind of. I needed to be more out there, and yeah, just like kind of pushing myself out of my comfort zone. And that's been really harmful. So I think it really just comes down to that representation and like education, like a lot of people have been alluding to, like in school, and especially, you know, as younger generations kind of come up, some of that comes with them, but older generations might not travel that far. So I think really just that representation of all the different communities.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I feel like both yours and Kim's statements really connect. Like, one of the reasons why social workers don't really understand asexual experiences, there's no research on it, right? I mean, you can educate yourself on asexual experiences if you cared about it. But it's not that social workers don't care, but on an individual level, nobody's teaching people, and we're not thinking about educating ourselves. I'm so sorry that that was the case for you, that, you know, I can't imagine being that, like, because that's so much harm, right? Therapists do so much harm to their clients. And I'm speaking as a therapist. Again, I started like this summer. I was a therapist in my internship, so if you count that, it's been a little bit. But what I've noticed as a therapist, who is, most of my clients are queer and trans, a lot of them are young, like student age. They search for queer and trans social workers who are accepting clients, and sometimes they're what's it called, like their stipulations on Psychology Today. I'm the only person who comes up on Psychology Today who is queer, trans, a person of color, polyamorous. I don't always know exactly everything they search for, but that's painful to me. I don't know how you feel about it, but the fact that all of these people aren't getting the representation they need from therapists because they don't have shared identities. Like, yes, you don't have to be asexual to properly be a good therapist to an asexual person or a trans person, or et cetera, but it sure helps to be in community. And if I'm the only person accepting clients, and like a whatever radius that's actively, you know, advertising on the most popular, you know, database for therapists, that's an issue, right? We need more of us out here. I can't be the only one, etc. Fran, I see your hand.
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah.
Felix and everyone who's listening, do you all think that what we need, one of the things that we need to be doing is advocating with our alma maters, our schools of social work, to include courses, very specific courses in clinical dealings with this community? I don't know if those specific courses exist today, but if they don't, we must advocate. That's our role. We're the advocates. And so we've got to be contacting the deans of our schools and advocating for the inclusion and, of course, the development of such courses. What do you think, Felix?
Well, I'd love to open it up to other people before I answer, because again, I'm practicing stepping back. It's not very well, but it's a process. So what do other people think about that? That's a good question, especially those who may or understand administration policy a little bit better than I do.
I know for sure Tulane School of Social Work offers an elective in this area. However, during our last 2 semesters of taking electives, no one has taught it. So it's like we weren't even given that opportunity to take the elective. But it's on their website as, oh, you can take this.
Wow. I feel like that really says something, that we're performing inclusivity and affirming stuff, but in reality, it's literally an empty class because there's no one to teach it.
Yeah, I agree with Fran that it certainly helps to be an advocate. And I don't know, I think encouraging current students to do, I'm blanking on the word I wanted. To just get encourage their current administration to offer coursework. You know, it's having a separate class is great. However, I'm not sure why we would need separate classes, because are all of the current classes labeled heterosexual public policy, heterosexual clinical issues, heterosexual meso work? Yeah, so I'm sometimes hesitant to, and this relates to content around race, ethnicity, LGBTQ issues. Public policy impacts everyone. And I think the content related to all groups should be included in all coursework. Right. And often it's, add-ons, right? It's put at the end of the syllabus. And also for older adults. I mean, I did an entirely separate master's program because the MSW program that I was in didn't really address many issues beyond the age of, I don't know, 45. So that's something to think about. Do you make different topics entirely separate classes so that only, I don't know, 20 to 30 people can sit in the class if there is a class? Or is it part of the core curriculum for all classes? And as far as the advocacy, throughout the, when I was in grad school, I actually was part of the student leadership. And what we did, the whole thing, like who's going to be president and all that stuff. And when I was there, a group of us said, we don't want just one group. So we ran as a platform, vote for us as a group or don't vote for us at all. And we we won that election, whatever it was for. So we were, so the group that we were with represented I think all groups, race, ethnicity, LGBTQ, etc. We were in the dean's office all the time. We were in the professors' offices all the time, talking to them about the syllabus. Throughout the years, I've contacted. I will send materials to different professors who I know, and it doesn't really end up in the curriculum. It just doesn't show up. So I don't know why. I really don't know why. Are there any professors in the room who can speak to why the content doesn't show up on the syllabus? Not to anyone in, as Felix would say, why doesn't it show up on the syllabus? There aren't any professors in the room? Okay.
I'm not explicitly a professor. Can you hear me okay? Well, I'm a field educator. So one of the things I'm thinking about is sometimes faculty have, their own sort of rights around what happens within the curriculum. However, the department and the college can put some higher channels in place too. But what I wrote into the chat was thinking about even like bigger levels than that, CSWE. And so I wonder if CSWE made some of this more explicit, like they've been doing increasingly with anti-racism efforts, then potentially that could, kind of spill down to all MSW programs as well. But sometimes I think department chairs or deans might say that they can't dictate what a professor does because of that academic freedom language, but there may be more to it than that.
Marla, you have your hand up. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. You're muted still.
Thank you. I thought Brian's hand was up first.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That's my fault.
Okay.
Brian.
No, I was gonna say, they haven't talked yet, so they can go first and then I'll go, if that's okay.
That's good.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. So my name is Marla Parrish, and I am an alum of Hunter. I currently teach a course as an adjunct at Hunter, and I teach a course at Stony Brook. And I guess I'm here. I'm here at the town hall because it's an opportunity to learn. There aren't very many opportunities to just learn what I don't know in a relatively safe environment. So that's where I am in terms of, yes, we can educate ourselves, and yes, we care. And yet, if it's not, it's the same 24 hours in a day, and one must prioritize. So how to juggle that? So I'm thinking of, perhaps reaching out to a colleague or someone or a friend to ask what would be a good reading. And as a Black woman, which is how I identify, I recognize that it can be burdensome and a complete pain in the patootie. So I get it. And yet, I don't really know what to say if people are trying to learn and trying to educate themselves, and they don't want to appear completely ridiculous and stupid and embarrass themselves publicly. So they want to get a little jump on that. What should one do? And then finally, the comment on the curriculum. When I was a student, it was a career change for me. So I was a non-traditional student, and quite frankly, the schools can wait out 2 years. They can just wait out the 2 years, it's pretty easy. You know, students are busy with their coursework, some are working, blah, 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 families. I do believe the intention is good. It's just where's the funding, where's the money, where's the energy, where's the time? The course I'm teaching at Hunter starting tomorrow, first day of class, is a course that they're very proud of called Practice Lab. It's my first time teaching it. It didn't exist when I went to school 14 years ago, and it's the result of student input and a change. So it's looking at oppression and the history, and they use language like service user instead of client. And, you know, I'm looking forward to a dynamic year. It's a year-long course. But I don't know that I am coming, other than my own lived experience, with all of the isms covered, you know. And I guess I just want to ask for a little more grace. I don't know, there seems to be an assumption that one should know. And yet, where is one learning, particularly when part of the disclaimers in the beginning, what we're accepting as the ground rules, are that we were all miseducated. So if we were all miseducated, who's leading whom? And as a professor for students that are paying for this education, I don't know that I want to be as candid with my students as I might be on this call. Do you know what I mean? I mean, they're paying for me to be a professional and for me to know. Now, I'm perfectly willing to be vulnerable, and I don't know everything, and I can't, right? And yet I do have to have some sense of traditional power to appear like I know what I'm doing, to assuage the anxieties of the students. Does that help? That's just kind of my perspective. So I'm grateful for this town hall and others as an opportunity to learn. You know, I was off camera. I have to go now because it's 7 o'clock call, but I really appreciated being here. So thank you.
Yeah, I want to say thank you, Marla, for sharing that perspective. I think that it takes a little bit of vulnerability to you know, talk about that in, you know, a room full of people. If you feel pressure that, you know, you're supposed to know everything already, because I think our society ends up doing that. So I really appreciate you sharing that perspective with all of us. Brian.
I'll be brief. It was just something, it was building off at something that Kim had said when they were talking earlier about having courses that content integrated into courses instead of having a separate one entirely, because I do feel like that is, I mean, not just for LGBTQ students, but for students of color too, and students who may have disabilities. I feel like that's so stigmatizing that their entire, like, their experience has to be an entirely separate class, and inherently the class that's like the mainstream class that everyone has to take is going to focus on people who don't have those lived experiences. Like, that is the implication, that if we're going to have this as a separate class, it's not going to really be addressed in this class because it doesn't matter as much, especially when it's an elective. It's like you could take it, but obviously the implication that's being given is that we don't care as much. You're not going to encounter them as much. Who cares that much? They're only, LGBTQ people are only 10% of the population or whatever, or 2% of the population. Doesn't matter as much. So I feel like that's all I really had to say about that. But
Hi, my name's Carlette Scott. My pronouns are she and hers. And I actually, I'm a counselor. So my master's program was a counselor. So I'm a licensed counselor. And I supervise interns in a social service setting and supervise a team of clinicians as well. And I want to piggyback a little bit off of what Merla said. I think that sometimes that those of us that are not in the community sometimes have a very difficult time of even trying to maneuver through it, because our experiences with various people that are in the community, they vary. So there's not consistency. I feel sometimes, at least with the people that I've worked with, that there's not necessarily consistency in their views and their perspectives on it, if that makes sense. So I can talk with someone who's very passionate about it, who knows all of the definitions and the names and like what they mean. And then I can talk to somebody else who's like, hey, I'm just gay. That's all I know. Like, I'm gay. That doesn't define who I am. I'm going, through my regular day or whatever. And so that it's sometimes difficult to maneuver. I was fortunate enough that I did have a staff who was very much a part of the community, and I learned so much from her. And I've actually worked with gay and lesbian clients in a private practice before, who were also very open and willing to teach me those things that I didn't know also. But this staff member that I have, she's no longer with our agency, but I probably learned more from her this past year than I probably have the entire time. And I'm somebody that's been in the field for over 25 years. And so just the amount of information that I learned this past year and working with her was phenomenal. She challenged me. She was able to correct me appropriately. And I would say, please tell me, I want to know, I don't want to be offensive. But I think that so many people that don't necessarily know are often also sometimes afraid to engage or even have that conversation for fear that they're going to be judged. One of the things that I used to talk to her a lot about was to not be so offended if someone does say something wrong or they don't say the right, the label for that particular person or whatever, because maybe they just don't know. And just because they don't know doesn't necessarily mean that they don't care or they're not willing to learn. Maybe that's just not been a life experience or whatever for them, and they want to know. But I found her sometimes, because I'd have to challenge her and push back on her.
I want to just interject a little bit, because I don't know if you came in the beginning or anything, but so it may not be clear. We have been putting it in the chat a couple times, but folks who are not part of the community should stay on mute and then can share in the chat. So listening.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so if you didn't know, that's okay. So I just want to interject and say that. But I appreciate what you do have to say. I will say though, something you said kind of
please tell me, because I want to know.
Yeah, so you can put yourself on mute and I'll share how I'm feeling a little bit. Something you said kind of hit me a little bit, and that was like, if someone says something wrong, try not to be offended. And I think for me, as a person who is marginalized in so many different directions, just because someone intends not to hurt me, they may have good intentions, they're trying to do a good job, or maybe they just have no idea. That doesn't change the fact that I'm offended, right? Like I still feel it in my bones. It's still a microaggression. So I think the solution is not to tell marginalized folks to try not to be offended. The solution is to, direct action to folks who are doing the offending. So I definitely did have to interject and say that, because paying attention to my body as someone who's a therapist and practicing what I preach, that was my initial reaction there. So something that people were talking about earlier, like Brian, you were talking about having information, LGBTQ content integrated throughout their entire curriculum, I absolutely agree with that as well. So I wanted to highlight that a little bit and share that my program had a sexual identity and social work class, which was taught by the same person for like a bajillion years. She's a cis lesbian, so in community, but a cis person. And it was really harmful for me to have to take that class. And it was wrong. And when a cis person is teaching you about trans topics and you're a trans person who's very in community and knowledgeable about trans stuff, and you're like, that's wrong. It's harmful. So I wanted to highlight that as well. We have marginalized students going to class, and privileged professors are teaching them about their own experiences and doing it wrong. So I just wanted to bring that up too. I see that Marissa has their hand up, so I wanted to, give space to them.
Thank you, Felix. Can you hear me all right? Okay. I just also noticed having a big reaction to some of the people that have spoke and have tried to speak for the community or tried to say that hearing differences of opinion and passion and even preferences in what language and other things is used. Of course, we're not a monolith. I might be a queer white woman living in a certain part of the country and with my lived experience, but my neighbor is going to have a completely different experience, and all of us in social work are going to have a completely different experience. And some words that I might be okay with, someone else is not going to be okay with. And part of that is going to be our intersecting identities. Part of that's going to be what our own lived experience was like, if we grew up in an area, in a family, in a culture that was accepting or that wasn't. I mean, even age-wise, there's going to be a difference. And so I just find it really frustrating that they're like that voiced expectation that I hear different things from different people. And it's kind of like my mind is obviously we're different and we're going to have differences of opinion. And then, sorry, quickly lost my train of thought. One thing was thinking about with regards to social work education that I think is a problem with education kind of across the board is that a lot of times there's adjunct professors teaching so many of the specialized courses or elective courses. And one, it's finding someone who wants to teach a course or has an expertise in that course or is willing to do that amount of work for how little they tend to be paid. I know my program, and I graduated 10 years ago, constantly was looking for adjuncts. We always had a shortage. They would have to cancel classes because they just couldn't hire enough people to do it. And so I know we can easily put the blame on an individual professor, but I think it's also looking at how even within social work education, the labor that is required to create a good course that is inclusive is so underpaid, underfunded, underappreciated. I have a lot of friends who are adjuncts and they do it because they love it and they care, in addition to their full-time work and their private practice, because otherwise it's just not feasible. So a couple things I just wanted to throw out there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, definitely. And I hear both of the things that you said, and something that really spurred, the first thing you said, really, I thought about it a lot. Because funny enough, we don't talk about straight people like that, I have a client who's straight and I don't know, they're feeling this way. But what I do think in my mind, because I'm a purely polyamorous person and I have couples who are monogamous, and I'm like, ooh, this person's monogamous. How am I supposed to deal with this couple? They think totally different than me. I need to learn how to do monogamous things for couples. And that sounds ridiculous coming out of my mouth, right? Because we take the norm and we allow the norm to have all of this grace of difference and personality and all of those things, but we do not do that for marginalized groups. So I really love your point, Marissa. I think that Melissa had with an L, and I don't, Marissa and Melissa sound the same to me. I don't know. I'm sorry if you can't hear it. But I think that Melissa had a hand up, so I don't know if you wanted to speak.
No, Marissa hit everything I was gonna say, so I'm good. Thank you.
So I just kind of want to acknowledge in this space now that like that, you know, we have some vulnerable people, we've had differencing opinion, we've had the calling in of people, which I hope that's what it felt like. I try really hard to call in. So I just wanted to like acknowledge that and hope that folks still feel able to speak and be vulnerable in the space. Because I wanted to really acknowledge that that can sometimes feel hard and awkward for people, even as a community, as we're sitting here and experiencing it together. But I appreciate the opportunity to be able to do that and have everyone be there as well. There was someone something in the chat that mentioned my name, so I'm going to take a second to read it. Someone said, like to ask Felix to expand on who should be teaching trans and LGBT classes. I certainly have an opinion, but again, it is my opinion. So I think that's a great question to bring to everybody else. So I totally appreciate that being asked. So who do y'all think should be teaching trans and LGBT classes?
People with lived experiences.
People with lived experiences. Anybody else have thoughts about that? Okay. Oh. Give me 1 second. Someone in the chat says those with lived experience or those who or those whom are true allies doing the work or co-facilitate with those lived experiences. I'm sorry, I have a hard time reading and speaking at the same time. So we have a hand if you'd like to speak.
Hi, let me turn my video on. You hear me all right? Oops. Okay. So I'm Lewis, and I don't know if you guys saying we're out of Mississippi, but not fully 100%. You know, telling everybody I prefer to be with the same sex, but that seems like the way it is. But my question was, I asked you about who should be teaching these classes, and you know, like you were saying, some cisgender was trying to teach it, and it's like, oh, that's not the way it is. And did they have the education background going? Because lot, and I'm older, I'm going back to college, and I sit in a lot of these professor classes. A lot of them have great educations, but a lot of them don't have the expertise or the background or the history in the job, what they're teaching. So in the same sense, I'm thinking, how are you going to find, or how are we going to judge an instructor for trying to teach about LGBTQIA or trans stuff when a lot of your other professors don't have the expertise or the background or the experience of being what they're teaching? So we have to take that for granted, that, or not granted, but, or accept it, that they learned so much, and that's how come they have that title to teach. So hopefully we can get people educated and read and learn how supposedly the lifestyle is, or, you know, that person, even though we're not going to get totally how it is, but I think that would be a start to get someone training. And then they were talking about money, clients, or are we all about money? Are we about helping each other? You know, that's the thing. My goal is I'm trying to finish my late register at Jackson State University to help other veterans. I need to get my graduate so I can get hired there. I don't, you know, I could use the money if they pay me, but my goal is to work with other veterans. That's been, you know, I've been on 3 tours and stuff like that. So I'm in a situation now where I'm not looking for the money. You know, I want to help people. And to me, if we're all about helping our community or whoever people, then why is it always about money? Which, you know, that's politician, that's what it is, you know. But sorry, I hope I made some sense, but.
Yeah, I think you did. I appreciate your question. I see a couple hands up. So Melissa, if you wanted to speak.
Yeah, this goes along with what Lewis was saying. For example, I had a teacher that was teaching my BSW field education curriculum, and we got on the topic of one of the classmates was working with a person that wanted to be transgender, but then my professor was like, "Oh, how old are they?" And the client said, you know, like 15, and she made a comment of like, "Oh, they don't know what they're talking about yet." And that, I think, is kind of where we in the LGBTQ community don't want to hear comments like that, because like it doesn't matter about age, it's about, you know, how you know, it's about the feeling of being in your own skin. And I guess that's all I have to say, but I mean, that's why I feel like it's really important, like for professors to, I mean, if you're not in that lived experience, or at least educate yourself enough on the topic before you start commenting, I guess, in the area. So that's all I have to say.
Brian, did you also have a comment on this topic as well?
I did. I'm sorry. I like to, once I start talking, it's hard for me to stop sometimes. Anyways, I feel like there needs to be, like in this area, there needs to be like a short-term and a long-term strategy as to how we want to approach it. Short-term, right now, the situation is that there are not enough professors who are in the community that are able to that would be able to do that. I mean, that's systemic, that happened for a reason. But at this point, we're not in a position where that can be a reality, even for most social work students at this point. So I think in the short term, we definitely just need, these professors there needs to be trainings, education, and they need to be willing to, you know, invite guest lecturers, and maybe, you know, if their school has the money, properly pay them for coming, for giving their time, and that kind of stuff in the short term. But in the long term, obviously, it's dismantling these systems, ensuring that people in our community can get to a point where they are able to be professors easier. So then we can have people with lived experiences, but we're not at that point right now, and that's not going to change very quickly. But I think there needs to be a 2-pronged approach as to how we attack this, because in an ideal world, we could do it right now, but we can't right now. And that's the unfortunate part. But
yeah, I am loving your answer to that. I think it's really thought out in the way that it's recognizing that we're kind of stuck here, right? Our ideal is that, you know, we can't even get queer and trans social workers to graduate, let alone continue into traumatic academia to become professors, right? Like, how do we fill these gaps? So I like this two-pronged approach that you're talking about here. And, you know, to answer a little bit of the question that was asked, like, you know, my professor, who is a cis lesbian, who like I thought taught trans stuff really horribly, is a leading trans researcher in social work, right? So, you know, someone who can, a cis person doing work research on trans things for almost like the entirety of her career can make major mistakes. And the reason of that is because our community is consistently changing all the time. And, you know, if our professors are not also continuing to adapt, they get left behind. And therefore, so does their class. So why I feel like trans people should teach about trans things is for that reason. However, right, I think that I am a queer trans person, but I'm not a lesbian. I'm not a gay man. I'm not asexual. Like, I can list off all of these really important identities that I do not share, right? I feel qualified to teach a queer and trans class, but I don't have all the identities. So it's important to recognize people are going to be teaching about things that they don't have identities for. And that's going to be really tricky. But, you know, if you're a cis professor trying to teach about the trans experience, pay, keyword, pay a lecturer to come in and teach for the day. And I know that's hard, funding, etc., but it addresses two needs. One, representation in the academia, and two, compensation for educational labor. That is also key. So that's kind of my solution there as part of Brian's like two-pronged situation, is that we have professors who aren't teaching about their own lived experiences. So bring people in who are, and have those professors learn to be really, really humble about what they know and what they don't. And we have to be really adapting with what things are. I am sure in 10 years, I may be left behind. You know, it's because I'm young and know everything now, but in 10 years, the whole thing might change. So I wanted to also put that out as well. We are coming to the end of our time. And I wanted to highlight that someone said lifestyles is harmful. I feel like that makes sense. I agree with that. Because I know some folks can't read the chat. So I wanted to highlight that because I think that's a damaging word for a lot of people. You hear lifestyles in the context of like, I just can't agree with their lifestyle, right? So we should change our language to make it more affirming. So I appreciate that conversation that's going on in the chat. So before I close out, I was wondering if anybody had like a final thing that they were dying to say. And I'll give everyone a couple seconds. So we'll have a nice silent space for it. Or you can type it in the chat. Okay, so it sounds like people are putting things in the chat that for their final thoughts, and I really take the time to read that. But before we end, I want to acknowledge that, you know, we had some conversations, right? I feel like this was a little bit of a different town hall. Sometimes we don't have the kind of conversations that involve saying like, hey, this made me feel icky. So that can be like one of the hardest things to kind of deal with as a community. So I want to appreciate everyone here for sitting with us and doing that. And I love that even though it was a little silent in the beginning part, we did end up getting to feel comfortable and have thoughts and share things. So I really appreciate that. Again, for people who would like to, who identify as queer or trans and or trans. So if you're in the community, we have a special interest group next week to talk about like how you like we can really meatily change the profession. I don't know if meatily is the right word there, but I just mean like to have substantial change. That's the word, substantial. So I invite all queer folks and trans folks to go to that. And then I want to thank everyone for sitting here. So as the last thing, I want to do is just to do like a collective breath together to kind of bring us all in after we experience this town hall. So everyone kind of just breathe in. 2, 3, 4, hold. 2, 3, 4, and out. 2, 3, 4. So I want to thank everyone for being here and sharing space with us.